Okay, so it was about a week ago now that I recorded and brought to you a video on the Atheist Conference and the events, the somewhat gobsmacking events. I think it justifies the use of that word that was taking place at that event. I want to bring you an update as to what has happened since then, but I want to do more than that in this video because that was largely a descriptive video of what was taking place with this Atheist Conference. This is going to be a little bit more conjectural because I've been spending quite a bit of time mulling over some of the events that have taken place there and putting them in a context. Alongside, it must be said, listening to people talking about Richard Spencer and his ideas for an ethno-state, which I'm not gonna go into, other than to say that other than the morally objectionable factors that I have with regard to that, the idea that you could take modern United States of America and turn it into an ethno-state, I find about as ridiculous as if you used to suggest to me we send rockets to the moon to start mining for fucking cheese. But anyway, that's not the subject of this video. The subject of this video is the Atheist Conference. Let me start off by giving you a little bit of an update. What happened? This is a marvellous little coincidence of timing, which was that at the point when I pressed the little publish button on the video that I had made, about 40 minutes later somebody contacted me and said that they'd been on Twitter and seen that the Atheist Conference on their Twitter account had cancelled the entire event. Now that takes some doing to spot that, given that the Atheist Conference Twitter account only had about 35 followers. So well done for spotting that. But when I looked at the time, by the time I went on Twitter and actually saw the time, it was 52 minutes ago that tweet had been made. I went onto my YouTube analytics and looked at the live data so I could see how long ago I pressed publish on the video, and it just so happens in terms of coincidence that the two events were within a minute of one another. I couldn't even tell you which way round. They were in a minute of one another, that they cancelled the whole event. The organisers, remember this is the remaining organisers because Lee Moore had already resigned from as chief organizer. They made a Facebook post saying they had some complaints about Lee Moore and that the way that he had spoken, some pretty aggressive emails that he had sent to people involved in other atheist organizations, and that was the basis. That was the final straw that had broke their camel's back, and that's why they'd cancelled the event. They then took that Facebook post down, maybe decided they were giving a little bit more information than they wished to, and replaced it with another one saying effectively, okay, we've removed the previous post. All we want to say is there's some internal disputes that we've had. We're cancelling the event. They also made it known subsequently that they would be refunding everybody. Okay. That puts you up to date. Morally Grey and Bearing have also made videos on this event, largely with respect to Steve Shives specifically. I'll link you those videos in the footnotes, if I remember. If I don't, just remind me in the comments and I'll stick them in. Okay, I want to discuss three things here with regard to this that I find interesting, that have come up, and maybe you'll find interesting as well. The first is that I think Lee Moore claimed to have, his position was, and I think it probably genuinely was from the outset, that he saw the divisions that had taken place within movement atheism in the United States, and he wanted to try and heal those divisions. He didn't see why on the issues that affect atheists specifically there is not some common ground, and even though that you can differ on other issues, that you can still get together on those issues of common ground. Sounds like fucking common sense to me, but then again, I'm not a political radical that seems to dredge every political opinion I have into every single conversation and engagement I ever have in my life. Some people seemingly don't share that position. And so this is why I think that Lee Moore had an impossible task, and I think now that even he realizes he had an impossible task. Why? Because on the one hand he was getting flack from the likes of me and most, in fact, the people that left comments on my videos and some other people on YouTube, because what he'd done is he'd not really lived up to his claim. He'd made a YouTube panel. It wasn't that he'd invited Steve Shives. It wasn't that he'd had a Steve Shives speaking and we just can't stand Steve Shives' views to such a degree we can't tolerate being in the same space as a Steve Shives. No. Absolutely fine with Steve Shive speaking at an event. Why shouldn't he, right? He's an atheist. He's a well-known YouTube atheist. Why shouldn't he be able to come to an event and speak at an event such as that and espouse his opinions? The problem was that this was a YouTube panel, and this was a YouTube atheist panel and purportedly representative of YouTube atheists, and yet if you took the whole gamut of YouTube atheists, it was like one of those timelines showing you sort of when humanity entered the universe. You know, it's like 1 second to fucking midnight territory. And that's what was actually being represented with Steve and his best mates panel there. And that was the issue we had. So they were getting some flack from that. And then as we started to look at the rest of the conference, there seemed to be quite a strong bias and some groups were not being represented. But then quite interestingly, looking at some of the comments that I've seen since all this has blown up, it would seem that Lee Moore was getting crap on either side, because even though he was showing this very strong bias with the way that things were being structured and the way things were being set up and the people that he was having speaking, for some people it still wasn't good enough. So let me show you a couple of things to show you what I'm talking about. First off, here's PZ Myers. And this blog on PZ Myers is Pharyngular. The Atheist Conference is looking a bit shaky. He left after Lee Moore had resigned and just before the whole thing fell totally to pieces and was cancelled. I want to read you out one little bit that particularly just sums up what I'm trying to say here. This is what he said. One early problem was that they didn't seem to have a good purpose, claiming that they're about uniting the atheist community on our common goals by repairing recent divisions. Which is not a great premise, since many of us are not interested in surrendering a commitment to social justice to make nicey with regressive assholes. Honestly, I've got to say, is it just me or is that just a little bit fucking weird, that? Okay, because that's how that comes across to me. Is that how PZ Myers runs his entire life? Somebody says to him, hey, PZ, there's a classic car rally down the road. And he says, fuck that. Do you think I'm going to surrender my commitment to social justice by going to a classic car rally that's going to include people that have different political opinions to my own? Somebody says to him, hey, PZ, you like a game of tennis? Why don't you join the local tennis club? And he says, fuck that. Do you think I'm going to go and play nicey with a bunch of regressive assholes? No, I've got firm commitments to social justice, and that means that I will only ever attend events or join anything where everybody is in political lockstep with myself, even when those things aren't particularly relevant to the thing that event is about. Mind boggles as far as I'm concerned there, but that is the mindset and that is the problem all the way down the line and has been, as far as I'm concerned, for the past 5 years. These are a couple of comments that were left on PZ Myers' blog. The first from John Henry Beck. First I heard of TAC was from Steve Shives talking it up, but with mentioning Lee Moore being involved. I suffered, poor cunt. I suffered through a whole video of the two talking because of Steve. But Lee seems to be the same unity asshole. What a fucking asshole. Wanting to try and bring people together for the common good. Spit on the bastard, shall we? From when the Great Rift was forming, just slightly better acknowledging, vaguely, there's a real problem with bigotry. Still, it mostly seemed to be an exercise in Steve missing Lee's smarmy both-sidism. Vivek. God, the atheists that go on and on about repairing those deep rifts can fucking bite me. I'm not going to sideline women and ethnic/racial minorities for the sake of what? Commiserating with Krygon and Thunderfail. That's right, because if you invite people like Sargon of Akkad and Thunderfoot to your events, then you have to ban women. You have to ban ethnic minorities because that's their position, isn't it? What an absolute load of bollocks. That is the problem, I think, that Lee Moore had. That's the problem that he uncovered. It was the intransigence of that group. It wasn't the twats, the evil twats like me, right, that opposed them, because actually we are prepared to sideline differences. We are prepared to say, we don't maybe agree about that, we maybe don't agree about that, but this is about this. So, hey, we agree on this, so let's deal with this and work together, right? And then we'll go our separate ways when we're dealing with that and when we're dealing with that. But unfortunately, there is a cancerous tumour that is not going to go away of people that want to drag all their political issues along like a fucking great big sack on their back and dump it on every cunt's doorstep. And if that means that everything they're involved in has to be torn asunder, then that is what they are going to do. This comment on Facebook that was on a post that Lee Moore had made absolutely sums this mindset up. From Jane Everhart. TAC could have been a whole new type of convention if it dealt with intersectionality. Atheists have always been political. When Michael Shermer tried to convince atheists to vote Republican at one convention, he failed. Most atheists err on the side of leftism. It goes with the territory. To embrace this politicism in TAC would have been revolutionary. I fear you let the opportunity pass, Lee. I suspect the reactionaries have won out. Quel dommage. So let me get this straight. The complaint that Jane Everhart had wasn't that Lee Moore was being too exclusionary, right? It wasn't that he wasn't inviting everybody who's an atheist. The problem that she has is that he's missed a trick by not being exclusionary enough. She's a kind of ideological bedfellow of the Richard Spencers of this world in some ways, in that, but for her, it's on political grounds, and she wants to throw out everybody she doesn't politically agree with, whether it's relevant or not, and just have this little exclusive club. She says, hey, we could have made this event about party politics. We could have just effectively made this a party political event, and maybe it would have succeeded. And that is why it was an impossible task that Lee Moore had here. And so that's the first point that I wanted to make. For the second point, I have to go back to PZ Myers' blog, and this is going to fucking blow your mind. Why? Because on one issue, I agree with PZ Myers. And so this is what he wrote, and this follows on directly from the bit that I'd read out earlier. They also announce that they were not an alt-right or alt-left or a conservative or a liberal or rally, which is confusing because they seem to be announcing that they're nothing and are trying to occupy an imaginary middle between contradictory extremes. Can I just say, actually, before I go any further with that, this is a bit of an aside from this video, but I'm fucking sick of this bollocks anti-centrism. If you're an anti-centrist, that's fine, but stop pretending that there's no such thing as a centre ground. Modern Western societies are founded, every fucking single one of them are founded on centrism. So don't pretend that this is kind of false dichotomy that doesn't actually exist. Every single economy in every single Western country is effectively a free market, but with some degree of regulation where that regulation is necessary. It is a mixed economy that consists of capitalist, free market, competitive, private solutions for some things and state-owned solutions for other things, depending upon which model is most useful in that scenario. In terms of progressive tax rates, by which I mean a tax rate where the marginal rate of tax is greater than the average rate of tax, you can set a limit anywhere for any of your tax rates between 1% and 100%, right? There's all this marvellous little ground in between. In terms of a welfare state, there isn't just the two contradictory extremes that either everybody's on their own, some kind of extreme libertarian scenario where the state provides you with absolutely fuck all and you just die in the gutter, or you get to live like a king without ever lifting a finger. There are all the other points in between. And it's those points in between, often right in the middle in between, in that centre ground that PZ Myers seems to think doesn't actually fucking exist, where almost every single Western society functions. So can we cut this bollocks out, please, once and for all? Okay, I'll carry on, because I'm supposed to be agreeing with PZ Myers, not disagreeing. Okay. So he carries on. At the same time, though, we were getting all these private messages that, oh, yes, they were definitely a social justice conference. It made no sense. On that part, I agree with Mr. PZ Myers, because that was PZ Myers's experience. It was also Noel Plum's experience, because as you will know, I triggered it off with an original video talking about the Steve Shives panel and the issues that I had with that. And I got the following response from Lee Moore. I'll read it out for you. Yes, the more conservative YouTube atheists were not invited, as we are a non-partisan event, and those more conservative ones stopped talking about atheism. It didn't seem wise to bring them all on, a decision reinforced by the aftermath of MythCon. I really just care about showing diversity of thought. The two key problems that I had with that was the non-partisan event part and the diversity of thought. Clearly the YouTube panel didn't show any diversity of thought, and I was somewhat concerned about the non-partisan event because, of course, Lee Moore had suggested that the only people he was inviting was people that were still interested in atheism, when there was somebody there such as Foxy Jezebel, who hasn't made a video on atheism for five years and just talks about social justice. But then you had lots of other people as well. If you look through the speakers, there were lots and lots of other speakers, and they all seemed to be leaning in a certain direction. And it turns out, later on, we find out that he invited Bernie Sanders to attend. Now, I have no problem whatsoever with Bernie Sanders attending. What a coup that would be. Somebody who was a candidate for the Democratic nomination for the presidency. For them, somebody of that stature to attend, that's a really great thing, I think. That's going to bring lots of publicity into the event, and that's absolutely fantastic. But don't talk bollocks, Lee. You know, don't talk bollocks about this, because clearly you're saying different things to different people. And that was, I think, the impression that probably PZ Myers got, and that was the impression that I got, that effectively Lee Moore had got onto a bit of a train where he's trying to tell everybody what they want to hear, right? And if you're somebody who wants to hear that it's all going to be social justice, and yeah, we're very much pointing that way, that's what he's going to tell you. If you're somebody who wants diversity of thought and you want everybody to be represented and you want to start bringing people back together, that's what he's going to tell you. And unfortunately, you know, it's one of these things that once you start telling too many of these things, they all start getting fitted together. People start putting these things together and they don't actually fit, unfortunately, you know, and you start to look like you're speaking with a little bit of a forked tongue when that happens. And that I think leaves a bad taste in people's mouths. I kind of understand how you can end up getting down that path, but it's not a good path to be dragged down. Okay, on to the last thing. And this is an interesting one for me because it's one I've been mulling over now for a number of years, really, since 2012 when all this blew up. And this gives me a chance to crystallize this as an argument on video, which is that I find something objectionable, actually, in the behavior of these purportedly very progressive people, very ideological people, because they seem to have a very, very strong blind spot, a logical inconsistency, which is strange because one of the characteristics that I observe with very, very ideological people, they might not always make the pragmatic choice. Why? Because they want to be rigorously, logically consistent in applying their ideology. And so it seems even stranger to me that they would have this blind spot. And this is in terms of representation and diversity and underrepresentation and how you deal with underrepresented groups. Now, of course, I'm not talking in terms of atheism atheist events, I'm not talking about things which are relevant in terms of and warranted in terms of underrepresentation, i.e. being religious. Absolutely. You know, you would expect Christians and Muslims, etc. to be underrepresented at an atheist gathering, wouldn't you? I'm not being absurd here, right? There's no absurdity that I'm offering you here. I'm trying to offer you a reasonable point here. And so this is how I see it. This is the inconsistency here. That these people note that in the United States generally, women are less likely to identify as atheists than men. That concerns them. That at atheist events, women are less likely, statistically speaking, to attend than men. They're underrepresented. That concerns them. That on the panels and as individual speakers at these events, that women again are statistically underrepresented relative to the proportions in the population. That really concerns them. Here you have a diversity issue, an underrepresentation of a particular group. And what is the response of these people? We need to do something about it. We need to encourage women to come out as atheists. We need to encourage women to attend. What can we do to get more women to attend these events? They even had a scheme, Skeptic ran a scheme where they were paying for women's tickets. A couple of conferences have altered their rules so that they guarantee that 50% of speakers will be female. That's how far down that rabbit hole they've gone to try and engineer the situation that they want to see, because they are so concerned about these issues of diversity and underrepresentation. And then they look at issues of ethnicity and ethnic group or race or whatever you want to call it, and underrepresentation. And they're concerned. Why? Because when it comes to minority ethnic groups, what they notice is that in the United States generally, that people who belong to these groups are statistically less likely to identify as atheists. And that concerns them. And they notice that at these events, that even taking into account the different proportions in society, that people from these minority groups are statistically less likely to attend these events. And that concerns them. And then they notice that on the panels and as individual speakers, they are statistically, again, proportionally, less likely to be on one of those panels as a speaker. And that really concerns them, and they want to do something about it. Why? Because it's an issue of diversity, because it's an issue of underrepresentation. I think you're probably getting the theme here, right? So they want to do something about it. And again, sometimes they've guaranteed, let's get more speakers that are not people of white on stage to try and redress this balance. They're doing something about it. And then they look out there and they notice that in the United States, people who identify on the political right and are socially conservative are less likely to identify as atheists. And then they notice that of people attending these events, people who are socially conservative and who are on the right are less likely to attend. And then they notice that in the panels and the individual speakers at these events, it's less likely to involve people who are socially conservative, who are people who are on the right. And you know what their response is? Brilliant. Right-wingers don't seem to be interested in this. Most atheists are left-wing, so let's just exclude these cunts entirely. That is their response. Imagine if that was their response with women, right? Women don't seem that particularly interested in atheism, so I'll tell you what, let's just make it a fucking sausage fest, right? Okay, let's just make this event for whites, because to be honest, most other ethnic groups don't seem that bothered about it. How abhorrent would that be? How objectionable would that be? You have a group in the United States, which is about 50% of the fucking population, which are those from that middle point through to the right, okay? The middle point through to the right that is statistically largely underrepresented in society in terms of identifying as atheist or not believing in God, underrepresented in terms of attending these conferences, underrepresented as speakers. And you know from the situation in countries like the United Kingdom, there is no absolute reason why it has to be that way, that it doesn't magically make you left-wing just because you don't believe in God, and that you can have just as many people on the right that don't believe in God as on the left, right? And yet, despite their ideological commitment to valuing underrepresented groups and valuing diversity and trying their best to challenge these things and overcome it, when it boils down to it, all they're really interested in is making this yet another political rally. Bollocks to people on the right. There aren't many of them interested, so let's fuck them off entirely. Honestly, if what you want is a political rally, and be in no doubt I mean a party political rally, okay? Let's not have any Weasley comeback about, well, obviously atheist issues are political issues. Yes, of course they are. All issues are political issues. We're talking about party politics here. Then can I make a really mind-blowing, revelatory suggestion to you? If what you want is a party political rally, why don't you attend a party political rally? That way you can be surrounded by the people you want to be surrounded with. None of these people that have problematic views. Hell, it's not as if they're hard to come by in North America, is it? Right? And you don't even have to have a general political rally. If just like some people on the left, they're still just too problematic to be surrounded by, I can guarantee you, copper bottom guarantee, I don't know what your political views are, but there is a political rally, party political rally out there just for you, where everybody who attends will be lockstep in thinking with your thinking. Alternatively, if you're prepared to accept that atheist events are about things just pertaining to atheism and not party political rallies, and you are genuinely interested in diversity and underrepresentation and what can be done about that, can I tell you something that I observe from over the pond? I mean, obviously not literally, I'm talking about metaphorically, I can't see that far. When I look from over the pond, the bit that seems really odd to me and taken for granted is this just this assumption, this passive assumption that atheists are on the left and not on the right, and that's just the way it is. That's just the way of the world. That's just the way it functions. I can tell you that it isn't, and I can give you the stats to show that it isn't. That in the United Kingdom, and I believe this is mirrored across most of Western Europe, that there is a much more even spread of atheism on both political wings. So maybe actually, rather than using that as an excuse to exclude these people from attending or speaking at your rallies, or refusing to attend these atheist events because they might include people on the right, and hey, there's not that many of them, so let's just kick them into the wilderness, can I suggest instead maybe that's where you need to be tackling? Because it seems to me that's the elephant in the room. That's the big issue. That's the bit where the United States seems absolutely out of place with other developed Western nations. Okay, that's what I wanted to say. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.